was chuckling in a way during this sessions was the metaphors we've used to convince the political leadership. We've had Star Trek, the Canucks, and I had to use Ryan, the Oscar-winning film, to convince the mayor of Mississauga that we should go in the direction that I had been suggesting as my vision, which was actually to build a culture plan that was digital and looking at the idea of the public realm, the new public realm, which was the digital public realm, etc. Anyway, my office also reported to the CAO directly and the mayor, and luckily I was able to get $500,000 to do the first culture plan. Anyway, I think these are really interesting contexts and contrasts in the three cases that we heard. Fascinating. I'm just going to start off the Q&A very quickly with a question for each one of you, each one of the presentations. So Rosemary, I'm going to start with you. Your presentation of the curatorial intervention. So it piqued my curiosity. We saw a lot of the work and how you referred to it was really interesting, but what was the impact of the exhibition at the Whitechapel? I mean, on its approach to future exhibitions, on the audience, for example. I'd be really interested to know what kind of an impact that kind of your superhighway presentation had on the way the Whitechapel moved forward, even during that.
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting.
Sorry. Oh, thank you.
Thanks, Peter. That's a really interesting and complicated question for the Whitechapel, because I mean, first of all, everybody has to understand that I don't work at the Whitechapel Gallery, but it's a really interesting problem for the Whitechapel because they don't actually have their own permanent collection. So everything they bring in is really to try and, as you say, stimulate their own practice, develop their archive, and then stimulate the work that's being done by other artists. And what they are able to do is, because of their locatedness and because they are perhaps more innovative than, say, the Tate is able to be, although that has changed a lot with the new Tate Exchange, which, you know, could have been something we could have talked about. What they are able to do is they are able to bring in sort of more radical exhibitions and involve their communities more. I think overall what they did with Electronic Superhighway are things that are, their outreach are things that are normally done in the UK. So they had quite a few symposia associated with it. There are a number of presentations online that you can go and watch about the exhibition that took place there. And, but in terms of actually affecting the space and the way they look at work, I'm not sure if I can really say that anything was permanently changed as a consequence of that exhibition. But I do think that the landscape of understanding, that was the first time in many, many years that there had been this kind of a show. And then a similar show, Big Bang, also took place simultaneously. And both of those were landmark exhibitions that really, I think, changed the way other galleries and other institutions looked at artwork.
So there was impact in other ways that you can speak to, I suppose. I think, Leanne, what I wanted to ask you was, and I was struck by this because I think these are real questions for galleries. You've obviously made a digital media acquisition policy, and I think it could be a model for other public art galleries. What are the two things you would not do in hindsight, and what are the risks that you took?
Oh, the feeling that I have just doing the digital media, walking that path, is not looking down. It never even occurred to me to look back. Like, You know, it's always been walking on air, because there's never actually been a funding stream for the Tech Lab or the sound program. It's just, it had to be done, and so we added it. We do about 18 exhibitions a year, so it's always challenging. I've never looked back, and I think that the biggest lesson that we've learned, and I think it applies to everything we do, is how important it is to listen. There's such a stupidity that comes with assuming that you know something, and there's wisdom that comes when you listen. So that's probably maybe listening earlier.
Right.
Yeah. Or knowing those things sooner would have been helpful.
And for Gordon and Sarah, wow, what an amazing feat. And like to reinvent the gallery in that way constantly. I mean, I think we're all in awe. But what is your critical assessment, or what's the feedback? What's the critical assessment you have on your own, on the thing that you have created?
We'll try. Hello.
Well, maybe what I'll do, just one thing that we didn't really talk about is that by being on the floor and essentially greeting every visitor who comes in, we have the best, most accurate demographic information probably of any public gallery. We know actually by name a huge number of our visitors. We know where they're from, we know how often they come, we know how many kids they have, we know kind of everything about our audience because we actually talk to them. So in terms of critical analysis of it or feedback that we get, we're shocked at how positive our feedback is. I mean, the other thing is we get 100 people a day telling us how great we are, which is really, really nice.
I would say tempering that, you have to have huge amounts of energy. You have to be available all the time. This is a growth stage, so we're 4 years in. It can't continue forever. And so then you have to start looking at ways that you can continue that energy, and how is that done, and how do you add to that? With passion and with understanding of these goals that we've instituted.
Okay, I'd like to open it up to the floor. I know you all have burning questions on what we've seen and heard today. Yes. Nell.
Given that last statement that you guys have a lot of direct feedback from people, I'm assuming that Rosamund and Leanne, you also have some sense of how people respond. So given this kind of split that's come up, I brought it up, between the new media world and the larger art world, do you think that, I guess it would be all anecdotal as evidence, but do you think that people internally reconcile their experience of new media art with other art, with paintings, etc., or do you have a sense of that? Do you have any way to respond to that?
Yeah, I just want to tell just a little story. Sylvia Grace Borda, one of our first artists in residence, her proposal was to photograph every bus stop in Surrey, which was over 1,000 bus stops. Surrey's 300 square kilometers. And then she worked with Art Engine to create a website and quite an interesting project. At the time that we presented it, there were studies that had been done about what people wanted to see in galleries, and it is, as you would know, landscape painting. Number one, the last thing, sort of like level G, was digital media. So we weren't sure what would happen. We also had her come and give an artist talk, an artist come and talk about a digital media project. It took 40 minutes to sit through the presentation of the artwork. People stayed for the entire time. They would look at a painting for, what's the average for looking at a painting? It's like 3.5 seconds or something. 40 minutes with an artwork. Who spends that kind of time? The other thing was the artist talk. It was shocking. It was a complete demographic profile of our community came. It was so surprising. It was completely contradictory to what people thought they wanted and what they actually did. So, and it may have done something, had something to do with what the subject was, but that was the reality, and that's what we've repeatedly seen. People think that they want paintings, but they don't spend time with them. It's a phenomena that we see over and over again.
I think in the case of the Whitechapel, there's two things that I can say about the electronic superhighway that are really relevant. One is a kind of curatorial factor. So in the way it was curated, downstairs you had this sort of mad cacophony, anarchy, a space that somebody like myself found quite daunting. Upstairs on the second level was much more a historical picture of where the art had come from and where digital media had come from. And there were, and remember, we're talking about a gallery that is not enormous and had over 150 artworks. And Mohammed and I were just talking about this because downstairs it was crazy. Upstairs it was much more calm. But what it did was, downstairs you found that all the young people, the post-millennials, were totally engaged with what was going on in the space. And people like myself were going upstairs and kind of having that more sublime relationship with the gallery that we are used to. So there was that. But the second thing was, because the exhibition was actually organized as a feedback loop, when you were downstairs, you had that experience. You went upstairs, you had a much more intellectual experience and a much more reflective experience. And then when you went downstairs the second time, because you had to move through the space again to exit, so it became like a feedback loop, you actually began to reflect on those pieces in a way that you never would have when first encountering them. So it was something to do with the curatorial vision also that created that kind of educational or didactic experience. Yeah.
We have audiences that are young that obviously engage with the works, but we also have older audiences that are completely engaged with this material. Because we're walking people through the gallery and having conversations, we're able to talk to them about the fact that this is art, this is material that artists use in a way that all artists have used new media for thousands of years. They've always sort of pushed boundaries with new media. So yeah, these are interesting conversations.
I guess the thing that Leanne was talking about, another thing with our numbers is that the average length for a visitor to stay in our gallery is 20 minutes to an hour, which is a really long stay. And I think the other thing, and it's again touching a bit on what Leanne was saying, is that when we were pushing the idea, no one really knew what a new media gallery was. And what we were convincing council was that it's not that people know what they want, it's that people want what they know. And we were a big unknown to the city. It's like they didn't really have an opinion about a new media gallery because they didn't have a clue what a new media gallery was. So that relationship with traditional art, I think initially when the community wanted a gallery, they wanted paintings and things like that. But now that we've been open, it's hard for us to compare to a traditional gallery because we are actually a dedicated, focused new media space.
Yeah.
So Steve Daniels yesterday talked about the fact that stuff breaks. So you're a new media gallery and Surrey has so much new media. When stuff breaks, what do you do?
Well, yeah, doing it for a while. We work with the artists. We talk to them about the smoke and mirrors, because as I was saying about easily changing from artist to gallery in terms of who bears the risk and the pain is we want to protect the artist, and we also want to protect ourselves. If we're presenting ourselves as showing new media, it better be working. And so we partner with the artist. Sometimes it might be an interactive work responding to your presence, and sometimes it might be a video where it looks like it's doing that, but it actually isn't. So we prepare the artist so that there are 2 layers to most of the artworks. So we do everything we can so it always is working, or it appears to be working. Because what my rule of thumb in working with an artist is only we know what it was supposed to do. And the other thing is we don't point to a problem. So we don't say it's not working. So those are the things that have, those are our secrets.
We're slightly different in our approach. If it breaks, it's broken. But we typically, we've only had that on a few occasions, to be fair. We don't, unlike Leanne, we don't commission works. We don't collect works. We only deal with finished work. That's partly a budgetary thing, but it also means that the work we get is typically at least been exhibited somewhere once before. So it's generally we look for work that is rock solid, basically. But having said that, things go wrong. I actually get very involved in understanding what to do when things go wrong, and we will typically repair it. We recently had a work by Sokano and Yang 02, which was a robotic drawing on the wall that was down about 50% of the time, and we ended up sort of taking parts off one row. We had some spare robots and rebuilding them over and over and over again to keep it running. And there are troubleshooting things we have to deal with. The fly revolver suddenly stopped responding. We had to figure out why that happened. It turned out that people had figured out that they could activate the trigger by putting the shadow of a fly on the target. So he had to turn up the resolution of it to make the flies really black, much blacker than the shadows. And what had happened was there was a dome over the camera, and basically the flies were pooing on the dome, which was turning the black of the flies gray. And the solution for that ended up that we had to clean the dome, and the piece started to work again. Another piece, it was just the air with the sofa that balances on the point of one leg. It was spinning and collapsing, and it turned out that it was because we're a Class A gallery and we're doing 6 air changes an hour. The air currents were actually it was so delicately balanced, it was spinning and the cable was pulling it over. So we had to redirect our currents. So and another big problem we've had with 2 robotic pieces is electromagnetic interference, which is a really difficult thing to fix. And sometimes it's just a matter of moving a power transformer 3 inches over and everything works. And sometimes you just can't fix it, and it goes down and it goes down and it goes down. So with us, we typically we will fix it. And if it does break, then it breaks. Yeah, I mean, we have shown a work called user-generated server destruction that visitors would destroy. So it actually broke 5 times over the exhibition. It was meant to break, but it was an interesting piece because after it was broken, we still exhibited it for several weeks as a broken piece in the gallery.
And that was about technology break-ins.
It was about people making choices that would destroy the work and deprive successive visitors from having the experience. And so depending on how quickly people destroyed it, it would have to sit for a longer period of time.
Thank you to all of you. You can just feel a bit of electricity in the room, a little bit of buzz. Everyone is just thinking through all of this. For Gordon and Sarah, two things come to mind from a leadership standpoint. One is just a quick question, and that's, can you share with us a little bit more information about your decision to focus on group exhibitions? And then the second is resources. When I started here, I bought a stand-up desk, and my intention was to be spending a lot of time working down here doing what you talked about. And I'm embarrassed to say, I think I've managed to do it maybe 3 days. Mm-hmm. So can you talk about what your team looks like? And you clearly prioritized it. I know, and I'm guessing that you don't have one, so this makes it a trickier question. How do you make that priority? You've made it a commitment, and how do you continue to do it with what must be mounting pressures and distractions in a lot of different areas?
We have a lot of energy ourselves. Our team, what does our team look like? Our team, we have 2 fantastic technicians who are at the moment tearing down the gallery. Gordon is very involved in the technology. He just actually built the 4 computers that we're using in the next VR suite. So he has an incredible technical background, and that is very helpful. We take advantage of all the city workers, so those are provided to us. So that's huge. That's an administrator, that's a registrar, part-time registrar, that's all the cleaning stuff. All of that we don't have to take care of, so that's provided to us. We have 7 workshop instructors who are part-time, and we pull them in as we give workshops. We had a programmer who's just gone on to another fantastic project, and she's still working with us, but we're going to be looking for a programmer. And then this work in the gallery, being in the gallery, is shared between the 3 of us. So we're there each about a third of, maybe a day or 2 per week.
I think as well, we one thing that maybe didn't come across in our introduction is that all my work has actually been in the private sector. Or the colleges I've worked at or run were all private colleges. I worked at the Listen, which is a private gallery, and Sarah's work has all been in the public sector. So the gallery is kind of a hybrid of those 2 models. And because this is essentially a startup, we kind of took it on. When we took it on, we said, this is going to be hell for the first couple of years, but we treated it as a business startup and kind of wrote off 2 years and said, let's just focus on this. We're now in our 4th year, and we're coming out of that phase finally. And was there anything, what was the other part of the question? Why do we show group exhibitions? That's just us looking at, there are different types of galleries. There's academic galleries, artist-run centers, and public galleries. We think the role of a public gallery is to really give our audience exposure to as much work as possible. So if we showed solo artists, we would have shown 19 artists. By showing group exhibitions, we get to show them 110 artists. It's kind of just a simple math thing of saying, and we also, it's harder work for us, I suppose, because we have to come up with curatorial positions 4 times a year based on group exhibitions, but it doesn't seem right to have a solo artist that we like understanding how and why you put a work in a public gallery, I think, is a discussion, another kind of discussion.
So I have a question, or actually it is a real question. So, for scholars who've been looking at the development of contemporary art, it's one of the markers of like coincidence of contemporary art, neoliberalism, is the fact that institutions are encouraged to not have a collection, especially the new ones that start, and basically be a space that always seek the new and changes, right? And then that way, the costs are kept low, and then the job of a curator will become to constantly look for new work. And as someone who worked at the UBC's AMS gallery with a great collection that went back to 1910. We had like a group of 7 in this like student-run basically gallery, like Lauren Harris all the way to like Rodney Graham and other works. The value of the collection, and actually this morning I had a chance to come in early and go and look at the vault downstairs and look at the section with all the Painter 11s in the basement. It was wonderful. So you guys see yourself in sort of like in your vision to start a collection, particularly in relation to Suri that insists on having a collection, because as someone who look at these trajectories, I think it's very important. The public gallery needs to insist on keeping a collection because it's a form of material art history. And so it would be good to hear the advantages and disadvantages from you, these two like galleries that are in like very close proximity of how you guys deal with it, and do you guys plan to have one? Because I think it would be great to see what do you do with your future permanent collection.
Do you want to have a collection?
I come from a collection background. I was a conservator. I love collections. It is impossible for us to have a collection right now. So we're in this growth stage, as we keep mentioning. Eventually, perhaps, when the gallery becomes a standalone gallery and it has enough space, you have to look at space as it is critical. But at the moment, no. I would say in future, yes, absolutely, it would be very interesting. My personal point of view. I think I think he's different.
What kind of collection? Suri is very specific and right focused. What kind of collection you guys?
I don't know. We haven't had the energy to sort of consider a collection, but yeah, I don't know. It's a great question. Now I'll start thinking about it.
I think as well, we're a small city. We're 80,000 people. And we're showing significant international artists, so that there would be a kind of a huge rift between what we're showing and what we could afford to collect. So what we would collect would probably couldn't really be representative of what we're showing. I mean, we do show emerging artists, and we could probably collect some work by them. But again, because we have an international mandate as well, we don't have that local connection that I think Suri has more of a local collection, and they have a history of collecting. We don't have that.
I think we've got one more question, and then we're going to end the session. Oh, did you was responding to that? Sorry, I just thought you had it also.
Yeah, I did have a thought that might be interesting for you to think about, and that's the phenomena, because as you know from Zainab's introduction to me, I also dabble in public art, which is how the urban screen came to be. And it's the question of public art and new media, which is a form of a collection. And I think that that's quite interesting. I know that the profession of public art, that they're talking about it having a limited lifespan, which I think is really interesting. That the commitment to a new media public artwork might be very limited, like 10 years. Although we all know long living ones, like the one in the tunnel at the O'Hare Airport. Yeah, so, but that's another way that collections are actually happening with digital media.
Sorry, one more question, and then we're going to close up for lunch. But I think there'll be many questions that you should ask during the lunch hour, because I know people want to talk about where does the funding come from, and there's other sorts of questions as well. Niranjan.
So I want to tie this a little bit with to yesterday, and also to some conversations that we've had kind of outside. And one of the neoliberalism. The biggest frame, the biggest perspective. One of the things that's happening in the world today is the shift from big data, to blockchain, right? And the idea, and that's technology speak, but the idea is, can we cut out the middleman? Can we create ownership over our assets, ourselves, our information, our data? Can we share it and control it? And we're talking from money to our very genetic code, talking about everything. And I tried to define art, with the floor, and we came up with this huge space between a gift and a trap, a control, let's say. What we saw today, and just now, is an example of what we might lose if we cut out the middleman, the comprador, the tracker that brought the colonials in. What we might lose if we remove mediators. Because I see in Surrey, and I've known, actually, in fact, I can include Zainab. I see three old friends and new friends who have contributed from the middle space in such a nurturing way that the answer to the question, what is art, seems to me to be less in the artist, less in the audience, and much more in the commitment of the people in the middle who make the link between the two, who allow this meaning to flourish. So I want to thank you guys for what you do, but also ask you to comment on that idea of connoisseurship, authority, curatorship, mediation, selection, exclusion. It's power plays. It's a place of power, but it's also an important place where you can do service.
And just lifting from Willard Holmes from a long time ago, who was once the director of the Vancouver Art Gallery, he made this comment to me, and this would have been in the early 80s, that he proposed this as the mandate of the Vancouver Art Gallery, and it was much contested by his team, but I still think it has currency, and it's something that I use to guide my decision making, and that is, I think our role is to serve art and the multiple purposes of art, and I think everything can be organized from that place, from that priority, and that's how my governance of the gallery has been organized. So it's a curious and something worth discussing, but that's kind of my take on that.
I think we are always very aware that we are in a very powerful position. And you mentioned listening is very important, and this is a good deal of what we do in the gallery is listen to our audience, to visitors, and let them guide the conversations. And so we bring in our curatorial knowledge, the privilege we've had of talking to artists, of understanding the work at that level. We bring that to the conversation, but we don't guide the conversation after that. I don't think it's definitely discursive and wanders.
I think the most difficult thing is understanding how something gets into the gallery in terms of power. What works get selected? What are the criteria for deciding this artist should be in a group exhibition in New Westminster? And we actually try this idea we talk about of curating from the work back to the curatorial theme helps us to remove ourselves in a sense from the process as much as possible. So sometimes we'll see works that are linked by a process, by a material, by a philosophical position, by something else. And these are trying to sort of diminish our input as much as possible, almost trying to use formulas or algorithms to determine the work in a sense, rather than saying, oh, we like this work, let's put this in the gallery and everyone else will like it, or we think this artist should be here. There's a kind of arbitrary starting point for any exhibition, which lies with the curator, I suppose. It could be a point of research they're interested in, or an event, or something else. But they're essentially arbitrary things. Why is what I'm interested in necessarily the best thing to put in the gallery? And that's a discussion that we have all the time. And I think because we're co-directors and co-curators, everything we do is an agreement between us that then extends out into the gallery.
So we're arguing all the time, and we're having to defend our own positions to each other, which I think possibly affects the nature of the exhibition.
Okay, that is a very, very difficult and loaded question. But I think, we've been through a lot of different discussions in curatorial practice about the imaginary museum being at one extreme, the artist curator, maybe being at another extreme. But what we have to remember is that a human being is an instrument of knowledge. We ourselves are a form of technology. Technology that has perceptual capacities, organizational capacities, algorithmic capacities. We also fit within the technological scheme somewhere. And earlier, yesterday, I think somebody said, all technology is political. So there is, in a sense, even the imaginary museum, even the algorithmically determined exhibition, even the exhibition determined by chance, all of these denote value systems. And I think the important thing for the curator is one thing that you're saying, which is looking at the work first and always curating from the work to the idea. And secondly, disclosing the context of the curator, disclosing the context of the museum, disclosing all those different factors, disclosing the armature, not just of the work, but of how the work is put together, how it has been curated. And if we do that, I think we're resolving the very deep philosophical issues, because we're allowing the audience to make judgments about that.
Yeah, that's. I agree. It's a tough question, but I will wear my hat of the OAG and a little bit of my work. You are right that we've been operating in those middle spaces. With the onset, and given that we think that the use of technology is all political, and with the onset of, like the systems like blockchain, my question has been, what then will the public art gallery even be? Will it even remain? Right? And will Canada, as you call it, the communist country, still hang on and make it stay, even though the world will have moved on? So, and I like Leanne, also stay with, my job always, and I even said this to the Canada Council when I worked there, in all the decisions that were being made, I said, remember that it is the artist that is the bottom line. It's not the budget. And whatever decisions were being made around budget and funding, if the artist was not being taken into consideration, then we were in a problem, because we are talking about art.